Welcome back to the 150K podcast. I'm your host, Joe Graham, where we help take your dreams to six figures and beyond. Today, I actually have a special guest, Dan Nicholson. Now, I met you with through my friend Trey Carmichael. So this is kind of like a first meeting for us. I know that you're like into accounting. I know that you've done a bunch of businesses. You've worked with Fortune 500 companies. You've done a lot of things. But for people that don't know you, Dan, give us a little bit of your background and how you got into the whole entrepreneurial space.
So I would start by describing that I'm a recovering people pleaser and recovering uh, corporate America lackey.
Nice.
I grew up being being that sort of cliche kid scheming on business ideas. Got some degrees, accounting and information systems, just thinking, okay, technology, language of business, it's going to be the best skill set to be an entrepreneur. And then all of a sudden, I found myself in these really technical roles. They look really great on a resume if you want to work in a Fortune 500 company, or if I wanted to be like a public company CFO at some point, like it would look good. But I didn't,
Mhm.
and and so I was lost for quite a while, moving between jobs. People would hire me again because of the resume and the grades and all this stuff. Like, oh, he might be, there's some warning signs because he changed his jobs quite a bit, but he might be smart.
Mhm.
And finally, about 15 years ago now, just to date myself, gave myself permission to become a full-time entrepreneur. And then I had to unlearn everything I thought I knew from going to business school and from working for these great institutions.
Interesting. So let's touch on that a little bit because I've been in corporate America for 18 years. I'm starting to make the transition to doing my own sales coaching, podcasting, all that type of stuff. But what are the biggest differences that you've run into? Because you said you had to unlearn the corporate way compared to doing
Yeah.
your own thing with entrepreneurial stuff.
Well, I love this quote from this guy, W. Edwards Deming, and he says, "Every system is perfectly designed for the results it gets." And so I share that quote as sort of like a anchoring for what I'm about to say, which is the systems college um, college designs you to work for a publicly traded company. That's not necessarily good or bad. That just is. And the rankings, like the top business school rankings or the top legal programs, top accounting programs, those are skewed based off who places the most amount of graduates at these Fortune 500 companies or these big four accounting firms. And so everything is kind of pushing you, filtering you that
Hmm.
direction. And so that just is. But if you want to be an entrepreneur, there's a different orientation that we have to have than the orientation that you have to have in a publicly traded company. And that may sound obvious, but that took me 10 years to figure out.
Hmm.
And the orientation is when you work for a Fortune 500 company, you have one job. Like if you're the CEO, and people get upset about this, you have one job, and that's to maximize shareholder value.
Yep.
That's it. And so with that comes trying to pay the least amount of tax, have the most amount of employees, dominate market share, do all these things that some people get upset about, but that's the duty of the organization. When you're and this is the nuance in the different orientation, when you're self-employed, you don't have the resources to maximize. Maximize is like have everything now. You have to optimize. And this may sound like a little woo-woo or like nuanced here, but maximizing and optimizing are two totally different mentalities
Hmm.
and two totally different ways that you need to be reasoning through problems, um, thinking about growing your business, et cetera, et cetera. And so when I say I had to unlearn things, I had to unlearn this maximize versus optimize, and and then what does that mean now? Okay, well, how do I actually optimize? And what am I optimizing for?
Yeah, no, that makes sense because I'm thinking about it here. Like big corporations, they can go wide, they can hit a lot of target areas, they can do a bunch of things like that. But when you're starting out as an entrepreneur, you almost it's better to go niche and go deep with your community or your client base of what you're trying to do. Because, like you said, there's going to be people in that corporate world that can spend the money, the time, the effort to do what they want to do. But as an entrepreneur, you have to optimize your resources, your time, your leverage, where you're going to put your money and all stuff. So that makes a lot of sense.
It's simple, but it's not easy because we are wired biologically to think that more is the answer to everything.
Mm-hmm.
Right back to hunter-gatherer days, like there's a resource out there, it's scarce. I got to get everything now. But here we are evolutionarily, years and years later, it's still part of our biology, and so we're always going to default to more. More is the answer, which is another version of maximize. Let me try and have everything now. All the clients, all the employees, all the money. And that gets us in trouble a lot of times because when you really study success, engineering, luck, it's about being in the right place at the right time and having the resources to capitalize on it. And so when you're always maximizing and going all in on everything, then when the real opportunities with the high asymmetry to the upside show up, you don't have the resources to capitalize on it. So you miss out.
Yeah.
And that's a key kind of changing your orientation away from maximize more around everything is, again, simple, but super challenging.
But that seems to be what entrepreneur life is really. It's like it seems like on paper it would be simple, but then there's all the little, like you said, the nuances, the
Yeah.
everything falls on you, how you build your business, what you're doing, who you're trying to help, that whole aspect will affect it. So a lot of people that listen to this show are first-time entrepreneurs or sales professionals, like they're just starting out. So what would be some key tips that you learned along the way starting, going from corporate America into actually owning your own business and being super successful with it?
So the number one, if you go back, I wrote a book about this, Reading the Game, where I started really doing a deep dive into why is it that some people win and others lose. And what I found in the research, and I mentioned I did this really technical stuff. I had a role in research, developing this derivatives and hedge accounting policy. I'm not going to bore everyone with that, but I have this background in doing deep research, and so I kind of kept pulling back at pulling the threads of why is it that some people win. Some group of people are like, hey, you got to go all in, take all the risks, bet on yourself, burn the boats. Sounds really good, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes those people win and sometimes they lose. Then you got the other side that's like, hey, no, you got to do all the research. Slow is fast, fast is slow, all those cliches, right? Sometimes those people win, sometimes they lose. And so there isn't necessarily a correlation or causation between going all in or doing a ton of research. It really comes back to three things, but I'll focus on the main thing, which is what I call playing your game. So think about all the billionaires and the sort of extremes. Now we call them eccentric billionaires, but when they were kids or before they were billionaires, they were just weirdos.
Yep.
And so leaning into playing your game, leaning into your strengths, not trying to conform and become someone that you're not, creating distinction. Distinction is, I would argue, has always been important, but with AI in particular, distinction has never been more important. And the more that you conform and try to be someone that you're not, follow other people's strategies, the less likely you are to be successful. Because entrepreneurs are catalysts. We're change agents, really. That's what an entrepreneur is. You see an opportunity, how can I create value? And so I got to change something. But if you go and you look at the definition of a catalyst in the chemical sense, a catalyst modifies things without changing its own unique characteristics. So you actually want to be successful as an entrepreneur, you want to truly be a catalyst, you change the world around you, but you don't change who you are. if anything, you lean more into that.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's such a huge key because in the sales space, in the entrepreneurial spaces and circles that I'm in, the people that stand out are like the Greg Reeds that like they have their own style, their own system, or they're not trying, or like let's use like Elon Musk. Everyone thinks he's either crazy or brilliant, but he's still going to be 100% him. And I think too many times you see the cookie cutter people try to act like someone they're not, and that's where you see them fall off. No, I think that's brilliant.
Trying to design a system, like if you just think about it from the beginning and you just reason through it, I'm going to go into, well, first off, people, when I ask them, and I've worked with thousands of small business owners over the 15 years through either my CPA firm or CertaintyU program or some of these other things I do. And, hey, why'd you get into business? And they say a bunch of different things that all summarize down to, I wanted freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Some version of that. It shows up in different ways, but it's some version of freedom. Of course, there's exceptions, but in the extreme, 95% or more freedom. And then you check in with them 3 or 5 years later, and you're like, hey, how's that going? And you find that they spent the last 5 years just looking for someone to give them the answers. Like, just give me that one secret, that one hack.
Mm-hmm.
And every time they read a book, they become a different personality. They're like, now I'm trying to be Jocko Willink. Now I'm trying to be Gary Vee. Now I'm trying to be Elon Musk. Now it's like you got what I call business multiple personality disorder. So every time you hear from somebody else, you're like a new person. You just change. You're changing. So you're not a catalyst. You're a beneficiary.
Yeah.
So you just keep changing and evolving every time someone influences you. To which I go back to, like, you wanted freedom, but here you are 5 years later looking for someone just to tell you what to do. And that doesn't sound like an entrepreneur. That sounds like an employee.
Yep. Yeah. No, and it's very interesting because I used to play this game with myself because I'm thinking about, I used to, like, I've been in sales, like I mentioned to you earlier, for a long time. And I was called an entrepreneur light because I had to go out hunt to kill. I had to go out and make money, but I had all the overhead covered. Well, in the past 2 years, I've gotten into doing the entrepreneurship thing, really the past year. And it's like, holy crap, now it is all on me, but I'm enjoying that moment. But I wanted to go back to your point. You can be a consumer, but you can't let it influence you to the point where it changes you. Like, you can take a key and maybe do it, but it still has to come from how you operate, not 100%. Like you said, being Gary Vee or whoever you're trying to be that moment.
You take these individual pieces, that's 100% aligned with what you just said. You go out and you take this piece of information and then you make it your own. Right? You don't take that information and go, how do I become that person? That sounds more like sociopath.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So you need to make it your own, create the distinction. That's how I built every one of my businesses over the years, is just, again, making it's again, simple but not easy, making it my own. I'm not for everyone. I know that I can be an acquired taste. I'm totally fine with that because I'm not trying to serve everyone anyways.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to be famous. I'm not, that's not what I'm optimizing towards. I'm not optimizing towards what I call my solvable problem. And it's sort of my own unique definition of wealth.
Yeah. No, and I love that because I think a lot of times people get caught up in, they like the idea of entrepreneurship and they like the idea of freedom, but you mentioned something key here. They keep asking people, well, how do I get it? How do I get it? But like you mentioned, a true entrepreneur goes out into the world and creates something, forces it back into reality and moves forward with that. They're not asking for, hey, what should I do? They're like, hey, I need some data points to fix things maybe, but they're not like saying, hey, help me, and giving that employee mentality.
Yeah, there's some nuance here, which is the difference between goal orientation and problem orientation. Goal orientation is like you set some arbitrary target, like, I want to be a entrepreneur, but you're not really being honest with yourself. You're like, really, I just want to work less and make more.
Yeah.
And so then you set this arbitrary thing, and then you don't know how to get there because you don't know what problems you're actually trying to solve. So have more of a problem orientation. Here are the issues. How do I get to the root cause and solve those issues so that the system, back to that, every system is perfectly generated perfectly designed for the results it gets. How do you just make sure that you're getting the results that you want? And that requires focusing more on the problems or the roadblocks and less on the just final destination.
Yeah. And I love that because it's funny. Like when I do sales coaching and training, I teach that sales is problem solving. Like in my head, that's the whole thing, that success is boring. It's doing the things you know are going to work consistently over time. And you like literally just laid that out. I think too many times people get so caught up in, like you said, they want this idea, but they're not really trying to build something. They just are looking for their goal instead of actually creating or developing something new.
I have this thing I call the CASE framework. And CASE stands for compile, analyze, strategize, execute. And my experience is most people just live in the execute, like they just do a bunch of stuff. They think they're being strategic, or they live in the strategy. They have a bunch of ideas. I mean, I'm sure you can imagine people that they constantly have ideas, they never execute. And so we live in these space, but we don't do the compiling the data and the analyzing of the data. And when we don't do that, the strategy and the execution is flawed.
Yeah. No, and I think a lot of times people get so, is it that they just get in their way? Because there's really, we're talking about two extremes. We have the burn the boats. I'm just going to go do until something magically happens. And then we got the people that have all these ideas, but they want it to be perfect before they go out and do the thing. How do people get, go ahead.
I think there's just changing our orientation and asking better questions. So there's a lot of cliche things that sound good, but when you dig into them, they fall apart. Like, hey, the early bird gets the worm. Like, well, cool. What if I don't want worms? Right?
Nice.
What if I don't want, like, as silly as that might sound, but what if I want, I don't know, bats? Well, if I'm getting up early, I just got further away from getting bats. They're up at night. Right? It's a cheesy example, but properly characterizing the problem to begin with is a challenge for us because, again, we're so focused on more. Back to strategy and execute. If I was driving over to see you, I would, before I'd say I've got to be there, tomorrow at a certain time because we got an appointment, I would compile, right? I'd put it in Google Maps, and I go, okay, it's going to take me. I got flying, I got driving, I got walking, I got the bus. So I got all these. So and each one of those shows me a time. So I'm going to analyze and go, okay, well, what do I want? I don't really want to sit on a bus for that long. And I come up with a strategy. How am I going to get there on time? Execute on that. Pretty obvious, right? Why wouldn't I do that if we're in, I don't know what state you're in, but I think we're in different states.
Yeah.
And so I got to do some pre-planning. We don't do the equivalent of that in most of our business planning. Let me expand on that, what I mean by that. We'll do these vision boards and we'll put the pictures of the six-pack abs and the second homes and the nice cars and so on and so forth. And then we're like, so then we just do a bunch of stuff. We're like, well, I guess I got to make more money. But we haven't actually made that a solvable problem because we haven't lined out, well, here's how much the car costs. Here's how much the second home costs. I want six-pack abs. That's going to cost a certain amount of money because I got to hire a nutritionist, maybe a trainer, and eat differently. Got to think about it. So there's all that cost. So we don't line those out. We don't set a date. Here's when I want to achieve those by. And we don't look at our current resources. How much do we actually have to figure out how much more do we really need to make? I built a tool called the CertaintyU app that actually allows you to do this. So it's a little bit of a soft plug for that. But the point is, unless you actually know how much more you need to make, your strategy isn't. How do you know that you're adopting the right strategy? I see a lot of folks who are like, hey, I have many, many examples of Laurel Portier. I don't know if you follow Laurel. She's pretty popular in the marketing space. And she's public about this. A few years ago, I started working with her. And she was like, hey, my number one priority is I want to buy this beach house. And I don't know that I can ever, it's like 5 years from now. Like, okay, well, let's look at your solvable problem. Here's what the beach house costs. Here's your timeline. Here's all your current resources. So you need X amount more to make this happen. We calculated. Here's exactly how much more you need, like Google Maps would calculate. Here's what you need. And then we looked at our business and we said, hey, you know what? You have that money sitting there right now. You have these expenses each month, these bets that you're making, where we can't demonstrate any sort of return on them. What if you just cut those now and use that money to buy the beach house?
Nice.
And we could only do that because we knew here's where you're at,
Mm-hmm.
here's where you want to go, here's what it costs to get there in 5 years. What is the path that requires the least amount of effort and least amount of risk for you to get there? Hey, you know what? Those resources are already there. Let's recover them and reallocate it to the life that you actually want. And so now she talks about this, and shares this in her community, and is a huge case study for it. And she has people who are like, yeah, but what about, shouldn't you add another program and try to triple your revenue and so on and so forth? She's like, I'm 15 years younger than you, and I'm living the life that I want to live.
Yep. Yeah. Well, it's life by design. What you just put there, I love, because it's not the flashy Instagram. You have to have a Lambo. You have to do this. She wanted a beach house. You looked at the resources she had. She had the money there. She just didn't evaluate it. And when you went in and helped her evaluate, okay, cool. She maneuvered stuff around and she got to do the life she wants. That's what entrepreneurship is.
100%. Yeah. Discipline is, would you be a disciple of yourself? Most of us, if we actually answer that, we'd have to say no, because we're too busy trying to be someone we're not, chasing after all these shiny objects when we often already have the answers and we already have the resources in front of us. We just have to be willing to reserve the right to change our mind, admit the things we're doing aren't serving us, and stop doing it. If you keep poking yourself in the eye and you say it hurts, like, stop poking yourself in the eye, it hurts.
Yeah.
There's a lot of those types of things in our business that we know they aren't really working, but we're like, I'm just one step away. Someone's got this one secret. Once I get that one secret, and what it actually does is it makes you exploitable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. There's no one secret. Like, I've seen the people that just consume all the time. Really, the secret is you. You're the secret for your business, for what you're building, what you're doing, because the processes are the processes. There's tons of sales trainers. There's tons of people that do what you do. But for the people you help, you're the secret because you see it differently. You help them evaluate it differently, and you look at it differently.
When most of the questions that you're asking are preferences, only you can answer that question.
Yeah.
Should I grow my business? Should I leave my job? Should I move to another state? Should I hire employees? Should I work with my spouse? Those are all preferences. What do you want?
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that too many entrepreneurs are looking for someone to give them the answer, like it's a right or wrong.
Yeah.
And when you live in that space, then yeah, you should be afraid of like AI replacing you, because you think that there's these binary answers to questions that only you can answer.
Yeah. Well, and I agree with you 100%. It's like, I actually having a buddy that is into AI, and it can help enhance what you're doing. I'm not like anti it, but really relationships will beat everything else. If you can build relationships with your community, show up for you and do the things you need to do, AI is just going to enhance that. Like you said, if you don't have the actual plan or stuff in place, then yeah, AI can replace a copywriter, or AI can replace maybe a videographer or whatever, but it's not going to be the same as the human touch you bring.
Yeah, AI can do the first drafts. Maybe eventually it's like 95% there. But if you want to add distinction, that requires you and your perspective to come in and give your viewpoint, your angle, how you see the world. And if you don't want to do that, you're probably not an entrepreneur.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a 95% failure rate. And a lot of it is because people like the idea of it, or they want the fancy thing, or they do it, but then they realize it's a lot harder than what they think, or the fact that they don't want to make those decisions. Because I've run into a lot of people like that. Like you've said this throughout your thread, I keep hearing it. People don't really want to make the decision. They want someone to tell me. If someone keeps saying, I want someone to tell me, they're not an entrepreneur. Maybe they're a good salesperson. Maybe they're a good CEO. Maybe they're a good second person. Maybe they need to evaluate themselves and say, hey, is this really for me? Or is it, I just want to make a bunch of money?
Well, I had to unlearn this. I had 10 years of, I was like the person who's always got to get the the good grades and the people pleaser. And so I'm like, there's got to be a right answer. Like how do I get 100% on this test? Like, well, I get 100% when I finally realize that I have the answers. There's not someone else out there that's going to hand them to me. They might be a subject matter expert, but if I can't go to Google and get the answer, it's probably a preference.
Yeah.
Should I work with my spouse? Should I invest in real estate, etc.? I don't know. What do you want? The other piece, the other observation that I've had from folks who, because passive income is such a buzzword. Like everyone wants passive income. I want passive income. But this is again where words and distinctions and nuances matter.
Mm-hmm.
There's a difference between accuracy and precision. There's a difference between accurate and fact, right?
Yep.
When you say you want passive income, what you're really saying is that you want reliable income. And that nuance is important because people will, for example, get into real estate. They're like, I want passive income. So I'm in real estate. And then they build a portfolio, they design a system, and it's like, now you're working 80 hours a week.
Mm-hmm.
You work more than your previous job for all this quote unquote passive income. Well, why is it not passive? Because it's unreliable. You've set it up in a way where things are constantly breaking. You're the point of contact on all of these things. You've taken shortcuts because you wanted it to be passive, but really what you want is reliable, consistent income. And if you're building reliability, that's different than just, I want money to show up.
Yeah. Well, and again, I think it's because you see the little ads, or people see the ads, or you hear this person, well, I became this rich because I did it this way, or I did that. And it comes down to the process, making decisions that you want, testing, trying, acting on them, and moving forward. And then if it fails, adapt and grow and take the data points that you've learned along the way to build it.
Yeah, if you and I were going to meet up for lunch and we agree on a location and you get there and the restaurant's on fire, you don't walk in and sit at the table and wait for me to show up, right?
No.
It's on fire, right?
Right.
But there's so many things that we continue to do that are just not literally on fire. They're just figuratively on fire. And we just continue to do them because we don't want to admit that we were wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. So how did you, because you mentioned this a couple of times too, it took you 10 years to get to the point where you know it's your decision now, figuring out what you want to do, moving through that process. What steps helped you? Because I know there's a lot of people sitting here going, he said this, but, and I know I'm kind of asking the why, but I'm just wondering how did you get to that point where you came to this realization?
A lot of failure and a lot of recognizing that one struggling with that. So thinking, hey, I got these degrees, these certifications, I've won these awards, I've worked for some notable names, and I just so I'm the research guy. I'm not the burn the boats guy, although I got a whole thing on burn the boats if we get to that. What's going on? And then I'm looking at, I had the benefit of one of my businesses is a CPA firm, and I had the benefit of seeing people's financials and seeing people with hundreds of thousands of followers and all this stuff that we want to have, see their financials. I'm not going to name names, but like, those numbers don't look so great.
Yeah.
And just seeing the clients going through the same machinations that I'm going through and having the same problems across hundreds and eventually thousands of business owners. And so that caused me to I do this sort of what I call personal archaeological dig, which is basically something didn't work out. What happened? Like, what biases got in my way? How can I eliminate downside, et cetera, et cetera. And that caused me to start developing this operating system. Every successful entrepreneur I've studied has some operating system, mental models for how they process. They have a tool, what I call a toolkit.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started building one. And it started with these commandments. Every decision I make, I'm going to bias closer over more. Is this action actually getting me closer, or am I just trying to have more stuff? A lot of times I don't know what I'm trying to get closer to. I don't really know what I want. In which case, if I don't know what I want, I stop. Like, go for a walk, take a nap. Then I started to understand that I was asking all these preference-based questions. So establish this next commandment. I have to be able to differentiate between when something is preference and when something is right or wrong. If it's right or wrong, I just go Google it. I get an expert. If it's a preference, I'm back to what do I want? If I don't know what I want, I don't do anything. I go for a walk. I try to get some more information. And then I started thinking about this next commandment. Every decision has an infinite number of trade-offs. So when I decide to spend my time here, there's an infinite number of things I could have been doing. If I invest money, there's an infinite number of other ways I could have invested that. And this last commandment is every decision, every bet needs to have asymmetry to the upside, meaning I need to have a lot more benefit than risk downside. So I sort of started to set these pillars for how I'm going to exist in the world. And from that, I created these principles, and it allowed me to kind of uncover all these biases and false narratives that don't come back to those. Is it getting me closer? Am I viewing this as something that's right or wrong when it's a preference? Am I really recognizing all the trade-offs? And am I really setting myself up for a lot of upside?
Yeah. When I love there's a few things you said there, and it's something that successful entrepreneurs I've seen do. Delayed gratification. So if you don't know, you don't just make a decision. If you're like, hey, I'm not sure on it yet, you spend more time with yourself, whether it was walking, taking a nap, whatever it is, so that you can actually evaluate the data point. And then learning the difference between it, because I think so many times people get caught up in preferences and they get overwhelmed with preferences when it's not any data driven to maneuver your stuff down. And I'll admit, I am more of an action taker guy. That's kind of the world I've been up in, but I've been learning to go and do those stillness practice or sit with what I'm working on and make sure, okay, is this really going to move what I would call a needle mover forward for me in my business? Or is this just me spinning my wheels to look busy because I want to look busy?
Yeah. Well, we get the problem with being a problem solver is that a lot of times we create a problem so we have something to solve.
Yep.
And that becomes so much of our identity. Right? And so that stillness and that restraint becomes difficult. And then we run these races against ourselves. We have these New Year's resolutions. We're just not too far away from New Year's resolutions. And I was asking my clients and students, what are your resolutions? And they were all some version of having more discipline. And I was like, okay, what is it gonna take for you to have more discipline? And they're like, well, to have more discipline, I'm gonna be more disciplined. Some version of that, right? Yep. They're like, so that's interesting to me. And other people say, I want to have more restraint. And you're like, so how are you going to do that? Well, I just need to be more restrained about my restraint. Like this feels like a circular reference or something. Like
yeah.
And so I started kind of pulling on that thread and going like, well, what if you just didn't put yourself in a situation where you had to be more disciplined? What would that look like? It's like, well, I guess it'd have to be less impulsive. Or I guess I'd have to have more energy. So at the end of the day, I wouldn't need discipline. Need to be restrained. So this is a concept I talk about in my book about eliminating downside. We're so focused on the upside because we're chasing more. And what we miss, in my previous life, I work with clients, portfolios that had $100 billion or more. And we spent more time on how do we just eliminate all the downside. Because what we realized is if we got rid of all the downside, we only had upside.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone else is chasing upside so much that what they do is they miss the downside completely and they constantly get wrecked.
Yeah.
And so here we are trying to solve problems by being more disciplined and having more restraint, when in fact, what if we just eliminated the need for it altogether? How does that change our life? Turns out significant.
Yeah. Well, and it's like that less is more concept that you mentioned earlier, instead of trying to force yourself into something. Because we as humans don't like to be constrained. We don't really like to just, like, I do have a discipline that I do. I do work out. There's certain things that I'm going to do that are non-negotiables because I know that's going to help me be better. But we don't like that. But if you, like you said, focus on the upside and you eliminate the downside, you're not having that same. That's actually brilliant. Like, I like how you termed that.
Yeah, so here's what we've been told. Now we're just going to come back to this burn the boats thing. Here's what we've been told. We've been told you have to burn the boats. And we've been told this narrative about Cortez, how he sailed across the sea in the 1500s and he went into battle and he got there and it looked like an imminent demise. And so he burned the boats and they went on to win this battle, right? And it's this anecdote about how you need to bet on yourself. Now, what we're not told in this narrative is that before Cortez left, he was told, if you don't come back victorious, we're going to declare you as an enemy of the state, as a treason, and you will all be murdered. We'll all hang you, execute you for treason. So when he burned the boats, he chose the least risky option.
Yeah.
Right. And so that this is why I kind of question things and like, what's the real story here? And so it turns out when you burn the boats, you should be choosing the least risky option, given all the options that are there. Choose the one that has the least risk so that you can put yourself in position to live another day.
Yeah.
Put yourself in position to take another bet. Put yourself in a position where those 3 times over the course of the year that the market's on fire, you get to participate in those 3 times a day, or 3 times in a year, 2 or 3 times. Many of us miss that. And that's great for the people who are really wealthy and in charge, because all these people who are being really impulsive and think that they're playing the game and not recognizing that they're biased, they're actually guaranteeing that they're going to have to work until their mid-60s.
Yeah. No, and
that is a punch in the gut when you realize, holy, I don't know, can I swear on this podcast?
Yeah, totally. You're good.
Holy shit, I've actually been building these systems where I'm guaranteeing that I'm going to have to work until my 60s.
Yeah.
Because I never get to participate in these home run opportunities because I'm always at maximum effort with maximum risk, so I have no options.
That is so brilliant. So, like, I had Tony Watley on here, and he kind of had the similar idea. He built 2 businesses to $1 million while he was still a CEO, or like, I don't remember if he's a VP or something of some oil company, but he was taking the calculated risk, but it was the better risk for him. He didn't burn the boats right away. He took 2 businesses, got it to work. And I love what you said there, because now you can actually take the risk when it has the most reward, instead of, oh, I took the risk, and now if I don't make this next paycheck, I'm screwed.
Well, people think, again, these are false narratives that we've been told because it looks a lot better in an Instagram post, right? So we think that these great entrepreneurs and billionaires were huge risk takers, but most of them, well, actually, I don't know any that didn't follow this trajectory, were either naturally gifted at identifying opportunities that have significant upside. So like Bill Gates was naturally gifted at recognizing the opportunities in the PC market. Elon Musk has done this in multiple domains. Warren Buffett is naturally gifted at identifying these industry trends. A lot of the billionaires these days, you know where they come from? Finance. You know what they're doing? Engineering the outcomes that they want, eliminating downside, right? We think, oh, they went all in and they bet on themselves. Well, that's true to an extent, but there was so much upside compared to the bet that they made.
Yep.
that they took relatively little risk. But when you make a bet where you borrow against your home or you quit your job and you're betting on a business where you're selling hours, the upside is not significant relative to how much downside you're taking.
Yeah.
And so it's not apples to apples by any means. But the narrative is, oh, you got to join these things. And again, I use this term again. You become very exploitable because now you're going to be in so much pain. You got all this, we call them the two tyrants of leadership. You have all this scrutiny and expectations from your family, from your friends. Hey, you left this job. What's going on? You got all the internal shame and guilt. And now in moments of weakness, because we're all biased, you're going to get sold these programs, these quick fixes, these one steps
to
success. And you're going to bite on them in moments of weakness because you're in so much pain because you're not in something that has significant upside relative to the risk that you took.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a lot of the coaching industry right now. Not being mean, but it really is a lot of them. And I've always been, I'm like a risk taker, but I'm not I'm going to burn the boats and just, go on an uncalculated risk. And I think too many times people think, well, I have to do this because that's what my guy said. Well, maybe that worked for your guy. Maybe it didn't. Because like you mentioned something earlier, which is true. I know people that have like $170,000, 170K Instagram followers, and they can't make money. And then I know people that have like 5,000 or less, and they're making more money than like the guy at the 170,000 followers. It's all about impact and what you're doing, not the big, I call them vanity metrics. This guy, because he has so many people said this. It doesn't mean that they're successful. It just means that they're good at marketing you to give them your money.
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
So I want, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I just wanted to ask, because we mentioned it a few times, and I always like to do this in the middle. Where can people find you and what is the name of your book? So that I know people are like going, well, why haven't they mentioned the name of the book yet?
The book is called Rigging the Game. If you want the book, you can just go to riggingamazon.com and it'll redirect you to the Amazon checkout page. Hopefully the book is popular enough that Amazon sends me a cease and desist. Is like, hey, we don't want you to own riggingamazon.com.
There you go. That's awesome.
That'll be fun. So you can get the book at riggingamazon.com. Any of my businesses, tools, access to my social media stuff, etc. CertaintyTools.com would be the place to go for that.
Perfect. And before this, we were talking about coaching. So I just always like to put it in the middle because sometimes it gets to the end and people fade off. So I always want to let people know where they can find stuff. But we were talking about people getting caught up into following this coach or that coach and false narratives. Because I'm a history nerd, so I knew that that's why Cortez had actually burnt the boats. But I hear people say it all the time. It's just like, it's almost again like they feel like they have to do this one thing here to be successful. And in reality, we've been saying this through the whole thing. What I've been hearing you say is success is boring. It's doing the right process. Knowing when to take a calculated risk is going to make you money, not a stupid risk just because you think that's what you need to do. And then evaluating where you are and eliminating the negative and really focusing on what's going to enhance what you're doing. That's what I've heard you say through the thread of this conversation so far. Did I miss anything in that, or?
That was a good summary.
Cool. I always just like to double check because sometimes, you're like, because I think too many times people get so caught up in being perfect. And here's a stat that I don't know if a lot of people know. At 150K, you're in the top 10% of incomers in the world. So if you get here, I call it step one. Maybe you don't have Lambos, maybe you don't have everything like that. But if you can even get to that point, you're doing better. But I also heard this stat, which is kind of weird. Most entrepreneurs make $86,000 a year. So if you make $86,000 a year as an entrepreneur, there's a lot of mid-market jobs you can make that are 100, 150. What is it that you really want to do? Is it the idea of it, or?
Yeah, it's a good question. What are you really trying to get closer to is the way that I would frame that. We think about life in one currency, often money, but there's more than one currency: time, influence, energy, reputation. What is it that you're really optimizing towards? And uh, I think, I use COVID as an example. Because oftentimes we think we know what we're optimizing towards, and we're wrong. And that's why we got to reserve the right to change our mind. So many people said, hey, the thing I want more than anything in the whole world is more time with my kids. COVID happens, like 2 weeks later, people are like, oh, okay, I'm done with the time with the kids. How do we get these back to school? Maybe we should pay teachers more after all. I don't know.
Yeah.
And so it turned out we didn't want more time necessarily. We wanted more energy. We want to be more present. So getting really clear on the actual problem you're trying to solve is so important so that you use the right tool. If you view everything through the lens of a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. Right? But most of the time sometimes it is a money problem, but a lot of times we're solving for other things. And so we end up designing, again, the system where we're working all the time. I'll give you another example, if that's okay. See, a lot of folks who, again, will espouse the most important thing for me is more time with my family. And you're like, well, what would it take for you to be able to spend the amount of time that you want with your family? Like, I would need, here's a common number here, another $2,500 to $2,500 a month, really $30,000 a year. And then I go and I look at their P&L and you spend $4,000 a month to go to a mastermind that requires you to travel out of the state.
Yeah.
So what do you really want? Because you're telling me you want more time with your family, but you're spending, and it would cost you $2,500 a month, but you're spending $4,000 a month to get away from your family.
Yeah.
And that's fine. No judgment from me. But the problem is you're not being honest with yourself. And so your discipline is, would you be a disciple of yourself? You can't expect other people to follow you if you wouldn't follow yourself.
Yeah.
So stop with the BS about what you think everybody wants to hear, and let's get to what you really want.
Yeah, that's brilliant, because I think, again, like you mentioned, too many times people have this, they say the right things, but they don't really evaluate. And I think that's what distinguishes the people that make it and that don't. They reevaluate, okay, this is where I'm at. This is what I want to do. And you mentioned this again. I just keep hearing this thread and I like it. You're like, sometimes just look at what you have and you can subtract things that really aren't serving you so you can get the thing you're saying you want, or you can say, oh, wait, I was saying I wanted that, but I really didn't want that. That was just me saying what I thought people wanted me to hear.
What we want is an infinite game, so it's going to constantly change. So you have to have the discipline to acknowledge when things have changed. We are biased as humans, all of us. So sometimes we get anchor bias, loss aversion. So we need tools and techniques to pull us out of those biases and help us, I would call that mental sobriety. How do I know that this is what I really want? That's tough. But ultimately, we know we're chasing more. It's going to happen. And so you need a process where you are with some regularity. I do it quarterly. I call it the investor frame. Again, I write about all this stuff in my book. I go, how can I recover I go through all my expenses. I got a whole formula for this and approach again in the book, but I go through all my expenses and I put on the investor frame like glasses and I go, based off what I know today, would I still invest in this? Yes or no? And what would have to be, if it no, what would have to be true for it to become a yes? And I end up with a lot of stuff that is a no, and what would have to be true is not achievable, not something I'm willing to do. And so I recover those resources and I reallocate them to what I actually want in life. So that's an ongoing process. What we want keeps changing, and we got to have some systems, tools to keep recovering resources and reallocating them. Otherwise, you end up making 86 grand a year, working 80 hours a week, when you could make 150 grand a year working 50 hours a week with a 401k and a bunch of benefits.
Yeah. Yep. It comes down to, what's the life you want to live? That's why I tell people on this show a lot of times, what is your life by design? Maybe you're supposed to be a millionaire. Great. Maybe you want to make 200,000, 300,000. Great. What path are you going to take to do it? And then, like you mentioned, reevaluating each and every quarter. I like that aspect of it because I'm not the same person I was when I started doing this.
Yep.
And you shouldn't be. And like you said, you've grown in the last 10 years and you've been in this game for 16.
Yeah. For outsiders, they're like, you look like an overnight success. But the reality is,
Yeah.
I'd say, jokingly say to my wife sometimes, like, it only took me like 12 years to be an overnight success.
Yeah.
And it really just this ongoing process of trying to close all the gaps in my thinking, recognizing that I'm biased, trying to get clear on what I really want, and then recovering resources as quickly as possible. So if I used to be spun out for a year and now I'm spun out for 6 months, that's 6 months of resources I recovered is huge when you plug it into the like equation of what you need to have financial freedom. And then now if you go from 6 months to 3 months and 3 months to 2 weeks and 2 weeks to 2 days, like all the stuff you recovered changes the entire trajectory of your life and puts you in a position where you actually will have the space to capture those moments that have all of that asymmetry to the upside.
Yeah, no, I love that. So Dan, as we land this plane and all, for lack of better terms, I know I used the cliche there. Are there anything, is there anything else we missed? Because we've covered a lot of stuff today, but is there anything else in this process of going after increasing what you're needing to do, letting go of the stuff that, maybe it's just not helping you there? What else have we missed? Anything that you want to leave our listeners with?
I'm on a mission to sort of minimize suffering amongst my entrepreneur colleagues. And I think the path that we get there is people playing their game. So lean into who you are, stop trying to conform, recognize that we're biased. So stop throwing stones at everyone else, recognize that we're all subject to biases and own that. That's okay. Acknowledge how we're going to be flawed in our thinking. Reserve the right to change your mind. And ultimately, the biggest risk in life outside of death is not getting what you want, not living the life of your dreams. So if you're doing a bunch of stuff and not living the life that you want, what the hell is the point? Stop it. So that's all I got.
I love it. Thank you so much for being on the show, Dan. And for all of you listening, share this episode, evaluate where you're at, and find out what you really want. Because like Dan said, you have one life to live. Choose what will make you happy.